The chair hears none. Chair calls up HB 910. The chair lays out House Resolution 3384. Pursuant to House Rule 13, Section 9F, the chair announces the introduction of HR 3384, suspending the limitations on the conferees for HB 910. Clerk will read the resolution.
HR 3384 by Phillips, suspending limitations on conference committee jurisdiction, HB 910.
Chair recognizes Representative Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker or Madam Speaker. For the new guys here, and we might have done this already yet, but I wasn't sure, because we are going out of bounds, which means we are asking to do something different than what it was in the Senate bill and the House bill, which is to remove what's known as the Huffines Amendment. We have to have your permission before we can have a vote on the report, and that's what this does. It specifically will strike that paragraph or that amendment that was put on. Now, you know my opinion of it, that that's the law, and so it doesn't need to be in the bill, but I think it makes it very clear for law enforcement that it was. But I think because this overall legislation is important to get passed, important to go forward, I joined with the rest of the conferees and have filed this resolution so as we can strike that. Law enforcement needs to be aware that they follow the law and protect our constitutional rights. They have just as much duty to do that as they do and they do a great job protecting us as citizens. And I expect that my committee will be watching quite clearly after this is implemented to make sure that law enforcement are protecting our rights. And with that, I'm asking you, please join me in this resolution. I've talked before that if law enforcement does not follow the Constitution, you probably will see a law firm created of Dutton, Rinaldi, and Phillips ready to represent those so aggrieved when their violation of the constitutional amendment is taken by law enforcement. We need to be left free of inappropriate governmental intrusion. I believe that's what the law is. That's why I'm talking legislative intent, that the intent of HB 910 is to afford people right of not being searched and seized without proper constitutional authority.
Madam Speaker.
Mr. Dutton, for what purpose?
Would the gentleman yield for
Do you yield, Mr. Phillips?
Gentleman, yes, I would, Representative Dutton.
Thank you, Chairman Phillips. I have been a little bit afraid about this because, not because of you, not because of this bill, not because of the response of the people in here, but the response of law enforcement. And you and I talked about that a little bit.
I've been disappointed in some of the comments. I felt like made me very wary that they aren't going to follow the Constitution. Not all the comments, but some of them.
But some of them have. Some of them are quite frightening because their objection to this amendment, which I think you agree is already the law, which they say they're afraid of, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me if they intend to apply the law equally. That's what I'm disturbed about. But let me ask you a question. If a person is exercising their right to lawfully carry a weapon openly, and the police walk up to them and say, "Do you have a license?" Does the person have to respond at all?
I don't believe so under the Constitution.
Right. So, if the police officer asks to see your license, does a person have to respond?
Well, let me back up. If they have stopped them for a lawful reason.
Yes, I should have said that.
Right.
I should have laid the predicate for it.
Right.
My question has to do with, I'm just standing on the corner and I'm wearing a weapon openly, and the police drive up. I'm not doing anything else. Does the person have to respond to an inquiry by the police as to whether or not they have a license?
I don't believe so if they don't have a legitimate reason to stop them.
Right,
What I
okay.
would say is that most of us that would be carrying would gladly respond, yes.
Right.
But the question is,
But the
is
obligation-
that the sole, if the sole reason is just to come ask me that, no. If they've stopped me for a traffic offense, if they've stopped me, they certainly
any-
have a right to. The law is
Right.
very clear. If you are lawfully stopped, you have to show it very
Yes,
clearly,
yes.
very clear.
And that's why that amendment was so important, because the amendment only related to the word solely, that they couldn't abridge a citizen's rights solely because they were engaging in carrying, because when this bill passes, it will be a lawful activity that they will be engaging in, correct?
That's correct. And Mr. Dutton, you know, all the scenarios that we kept hearing about, well, what about this scenario? What about, well, as long as you realize that solely is in there, all
And it-
those ones, they had a legitimate reason and you had to show it to them.
Had nothing to do with the amendment then, did it?
No, none
I
of
just
those
want citizens to be
scenarios.
able to understand the point you just made, because that was my fear in offering the amendment, was that somehow or another the police officers may not apply this equally to everybody. And given the outcry from many of the police officers, not all of them, but some of the things I've read that they've said creates a grave concern in my mind as to whether or not some people, and particularly people of color, will be treated the same as others.
When you hear words like gangs, gang members, what is that connotation? You did that example the other day. When I ask, think about a picture of a gang. Well, who do you see in that gang in your mind? And that's the question I had, because, you know, quite frankly, you can't have a license if you're a gang member. So if they know they're a
Absolutely.
gang member,
So they would
known
already be
gang
violating
member,
the law.
and a gun, you can ask them and legally detain them, and I need to see
Absolutely.
them. See, I mean, we agree.
Absolutely.
But when they say gang, or if they say long hair, piercings, and tattoos, then we're starting to say it depends on what you look like, determine how this law is applied. And that is the fear that you have, and when we felt like that amendment clearly did it. Now, that being said, I'm firmly supportive of this resolution because I think that we know the law, we know what the Constitution is, and I firmly believe that law enforcement as a whole will respect that, and we will be doing a diligent effort to make sure that law enforcement is educated about this very topic, and I hope
Well,
you will help.
I thank you, because I know that you were for the amendment as it went on, which indicated to me that all you wanted to do was have law enforcement follow the law themselves.
That's correct.
And again, my only concern and the gravest fear I had was when I started reading and hearing the responses of law enforcement to this amendment, that somehow or another they felt that this was going to cause police officers harm simply having this amendment on it. I never quite understood how that was going to happen, but because some of the analogies they were using again fell outside the amendment, because the amendment was related only to where law enforcement stops and asks a person questions solely because they were exercising their right to carry.
Agreed. And that's, to me, there were some comments that I felt like were concerning, and that some of those, and I think that's why we're having this conversation.
Well, thank you. And that's why I thought we needed the amendment, because apparently there are law enforcement people out there who may not know exactly what the law is. But I hope your committee, as you said earlier, I hope your committee will stay vigilant at making sure that some of the concerns I have, and some of the other members here who may not be expressing them, but some of the concerns we had will not be borne out in reality, and that we'll figure out some way to make sure that everybody's treated equally and fairly.
Right. And let me argue the other point a little bit, too, that there are some law enforcement that I know with a good conscience, and Phil, Representative King and I have talked about that they were concerned that language may make officers reticent to do what they lawfully can do, which you and I as attorneys would say, yeah, there's no problem with that, but that there was a misunderstanding the way the language was written, and that there could be problem, and therefore law enforcement would be less likely to do what they should, which is do their job when it was appropriate. And so I know that's the other side.
Well, it is, but I wonder, why was that not raised when we decided to have concealed carry?
Yeah. Well, I think probably it was, but when it's concealed, you can't see an active.
Well, I know,
Yeah.
but if you saw a bulge in somebody's back, you would have the right to assume that was a gun. At least I would. And so what I'm wondering about is the fact that we had concealed carry didn't raise nearly the kinds of apprehensions on the part of law enforcement as we do now. And simply because you can see the weapon, it would suggest to me that there may be something else going on here that required us absolutely to have that amendment on it, because there are some people, I think, who may misunderstand or misapply this, such that, as you suggested earlier, as happened in several other states, there were several lawsuits over this where the plaintiffs actually won because they were able to show that the police never had any reasonable suspicion or probable cause to even interfere with them while they were exercising their right to carry. And so I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dutton. Members, I would ask everybody to...
Representative Bernard calls it a point of order. The gentleman's time has expired. The point of order is well taken and sustained.
Thank you. Yes.
Representative Rinaldi moves to reduce the exchange between Representative Dutton and Representative Phillips to writing and placed in the journals. Any objection? Chair hearing none, so ordered. Question occurs on the adoption of HR 3384. Representative Rinaldi, for what purpose?
Madam Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
If the outside the bounds resolution fails, is it then possible to immediately recall the conferees and move to concur in the Senate amendments?
Mr. Rinaldi, they could file for a new conference committee that would stay within the bounds.
But would it be possible to make a motion to recall the conferees and concur in the Senate amendments? Does the House have control over the conference committee at this point in time?
Mr. Rinaldi, if this motion fails for the House resolution, then yes, you can look at other options, one of which includes concurring with Senate amendments.
Parliamentary inquiry?
State your inquiry.
Is there a time limitation on when the earliest time you can do that is?
You need to be recognized for it, Mr. Rinaldi, but other than that, there are no time limits.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Phillips.
One more time, I just want to make sure it's clear. I'm asking you to vote yes for the resolution to go outside of the bounds, which strips the Huffines Amendment. I think it's important we do this and we join in solidarity. We're going to get a bill done that's pro-Second Amendment. Let's get there to do that. This is standing in our way. Please vote yes.
Representative Phillips moves for adoption of HR 3384. It's a record vote. Clerk will ring the bell. Show Representative Phil King voting aye. Cook voting aye. Galindo voting aye. Burkett voting aye. Have all members voted? There being 102 ayes, 41 nays, the resolution is adopted. Chair calls up the conference committee report on HB 910. Clerk will read the report. Madam Doorkeeper, for what purpose?
Madam Speaker, I have a messenger from the Senate at the door of the House.
Please admit the messenger.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate is taking the following action. The Senate has granted the request of the House for the
Members, Chair calls up the conference committee for HB 910. Clerk will read the report.
HB 910 by Phillips, relating to the authority of a person who is licensed to carry a handgun to openly carry a holstered handgun, creating criminal offenses.
Chair recognizes Representative Phillips.
Madam Speaker,
Mr. Stickland, for what purpose?
parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
So I assume since the report is already done, the conference committee has already gone outside the bounds and settled this without permission from the House. Is that correct?
The House has just granted that permission, sir.
But since we already had the committee report, they had already done that before we granted them permission, correct?
That's not how.
Sir, that is House practice. And that alludes to the question that Mr. Rinaldi had earlier, which is if the resolution were to fail, there would have to be other options for HB 910. Chair recognizes Representative Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, make sure we clearly, we're now essentially voting on the bill. If you want to vote for open carry, a licensed open carry, you need to vote for this. Even if you would rather have had the amendment stay in it, you still need to vote for this. We need to get this passed. This is our chance. You already had your vote to register your objection to the amendment. So now, those of you that have joined with me before to vote for open carry, let's get it across the goal line. Vote open carry, send it to the governor. Move passage.
Members, Representative Phillips moves to adopt the conference committee report for HB 910. This is a record vote. Clerk will ring the bell. Show Representative Cook voting aye. Galindo voting aye. Longoria voting aye. Alonso voting no. Phillips voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 102 ayes, 43 nays, the conference committee report for HB 910 is adopted.